Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. Israel has launched airstrikes on the Gaza Strip, breaking the ceasefire reached after 11 days of relentless bombing last month. In a statement, the Israeli army said it attacked Hamas compounds and it is ready for all scenarios, including more fighting. This is the first strike by a new Israeli government, which follows a controversial march by Jewish nationalists in East Jerusalem. The Afghan military claims to have regained control of two districts in northern Kunduz and Faryab provinces from the Taliban. The defense ministry said at least 30 Taliban fighters, including their commander, were killed during the operation in Khan Abad. The Taliban have not yet commented on the government's claim. US President Joe Biden and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin are set to hold their first and highly anticipated summit today in Geneva. The talks come at a time when both sides describe relations at rock bottom over issues of arms control, cyber attacks, Ukraine and election interference. No major breakthroughs are expected, but there are hopes of finding small areas of agreement. India has registered more than 2,500 deaths from COVID-19, while over 62,000 people have tested positive for the virus overnight. Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported 46 fatalities and more than 1,000 infections over the past 24 hours. While globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.8 million lives, while infecting over 176 million people so far. Well, these were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail, and we start from occupied Palestine, where Israel has launched airstrikes on the Gaza Strip once again, breaking the ceasefire reached after 11 days of relentless bombing last month.
It attacked Hamas's compounds and it is ready for all scenarios, including more fighting. It alleged that the strikes were a response to balloons launched from Gaza that caused 20 blazes in open fields. Meanwhile, a Hamas spokesperson said Palestinians will continue to resist and defend their rights and sacred sites in Jerusalem. Palestinian media said the airstrikes in Khan Yunis city caused material damage, but it is not immediately clear if there were casualties. This is the first strike by the new Israeli government, which follows a controversial march by the Jewish nationalists in East Jerusalem. Thousands of Israelis waving flags and chanting anti-Arab slogans paraded in East Jerusalem, drawing anger from the Palestinians.
Now, the Afghan military claims to have regained control of two districts in northern Kunduz and Faryab provinces from the Taliban. In a statement, the defense ministry said the Khan Abad district in Kunduz and Daulatabad in Faryab were taken back. The ministry said at least 30 Taliban fighters, including their commander, were killed during the operation in Khan Abad. These districts fell to the Taliban a week ago after heavy fighting. The Taliban have not yet commented on the government's claim. Meanwhile, the Taliban said they have discussed the intra-Afghan peace negotiations with the representatives of the Kabul administration in Doha. Taliban spokesperson Suhail Shaheen said the two sides deliberated over the order and sequence of talks sessions. Now, Indian troops have martyred another civilian in occupied Jammu and Kashmir's Srinagar district. The youth was targeted during a so-called search operation in Wagura area of the district. According to the last reports, the joint operation by the military and police is still underway. The identity of the youth is yet to be ascertained. The occupying troops have martyred at least 368 civilians since the revocation of the valid status in August 2019. United States President Joe Biden is set to hold a widely anticipated meeting with Russia's President Vladimir Putin in Geneva today. This will be the first meeting with Putin since Biden took office, with expectations low for any breakthroughs and high for disagreements. Both sides have said they hope the talks may lead to more stable and predictable relations. But Washington and Moscow remain at odds over everything from arms control and cyber hacking to election interference and Ukraine. The nearly 5 hours long meetup will not include any meals, while the two will also hold separate news conferences. Now, China has urged the US and the European Union to refrain from forming small groups, saying the act undermines global and regional peace and stability. The Chinese mission to the European Union expressed firm opposition to the statement of EU-US summit against Beijing. Chinese mission spokesperson said the statement is full of Cold War mentality. He noted the remarks go far beyond the norm of developing bilateral relations. The mission slammed Western attempts to intimidate China. The spokesperson reiterated that Beijing will remain on a course of peaceful development. However, it will firmly safeguard national sovereignty, security and development interests. More news coming up after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, India has registered more than 2,500 deaths from COVID-19 and over 62,000 cases in the past 24 hours. While globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.8 million lives, while infecting over 176 million people so far. More details in this report.
Just a day after the U.S. crossed 600,000 deaths from the COVID-19, a new governmental study found at least 7 people in 5 U.S. states were infected weeks before they reported first cases. Meanwhile, New York State is lifting all restrictions after administering at least 1 dose to 70% of the adults. However, health officials say nearly 900 people received expired vaccine doses at a site in Times Square this month. Ecuador has approved China's CanSino COVID-19 vaccine as part of the president's efforts to accelerate the inoculation plan, while Johnson & Johnson has announced to send 2 million vaccine doses to South Africa by the end of June.
We have received an indication from Johnson & Johnson that it expects to deliver around 2 million vaccines to South Africa by the end of the month, thus replacing those 2 million doses that had to be destroyed.
India doubled the gap between 2 doses of AstraZeneca vaccine without the agreement of a scientific group that the government claimed recommended the increase. While as crowds return to malls and rail stations, the risks of a resurgence of COVID-19 rise manyfold in the country.
We are going to open many activities in the market and public transport. Earlier, it had happened in the country that people increased interaction so much that they either minimized or completely did away with precautionary measures. We have to ensure that it is not repeated. We have to adopt COVID-appropriate behavior that includes masks, distancing, respiratory hygiene, and as well as environmental hygiene.
As European Union prepares for the age of pandemics, it plans to boost early warning systems. It is eyeing to develop a permanent capacity to produce about 300 million vaccines in the first 6 months of any new health emergency. Slovenia has ended a state of emergency, which was declared due to the pandemic 8 months ago.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported 46 more fatalities from coronavirus in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the death toll stands at 21,828. The ministry said over 1,000 people tested positive for the virus overnight, pushing the caseload beyond 944,000. There are nearly 40,000 active cases in the country, while over 882,000 people have recovered. The country's positivity rate stands at 2.46%. According to the National Command and Operations Centre, Pakistan has administered over 12 million vaccine doses to date. Moving to Myanmar, where the pro-democracy protesters have taken to the streets in multiple towns of Mandalay City and Sagaing region. Despite a bloody crackdown, the security forces have failed to quell the demonstration more than 4 months after the coup. A riot group says the junta has killed at least 863 civilians since it seized power through the military disputes, the figure. Local media quoted a resident as saying that a local administrator in Yangon has been gunned down by unknown men. Meanwhile, the deputy head of Yangon's Kyak Tan Township Education Office has also been shot dead. It comes a day after a militia group in a conflict state, Kaya State, announced a halt to attacks on military targets. The exchange of fire between the two sides has damaged homes and displaced more than 100,000 people. Now, the UN has reiterated call on Yemen's rebels to come to the dialogue table to discuss a ceasefire. UN Special Envoy Martin Griffiths made the remarks in his final briefing to the Security Council in this position. He said after 3 years of trying to broker a ceasefire, Yemeni parties have yet to overcome differences. Griffiths said Houthis are now demanding separate agreements on the Hudaydah and Sana'a airport as a precondition for starting the talks. He said the UN has offered different solutions to bridge these positions, but none of these have been accepted. Griffiths expressed hopes that Oman's efforts to end the war will bear fruit. Meanwhile, Griffiths and US Special Envoy for Yemen, Tim Landerking, are now heading to Saudi Arabia for the peace talks. Algeria's biggest political party, the National Liberation Front, has won the most seats in parliamentary elections. In a press briefing, the head of electoral authority said FLN won 105 seats and independent candidates got 78. However, 105 seats are fall short of the 204 needed to secure a majority in the 407-seat parliament. The vote was meant to open the way to a new Algeria heralded by President Abdelmadjid Tebboune. The long dominant establishment saw it as part of its strategy to move beyond 2 years of mass protest. But the turnout was estimated to be at 30% as the pro-democracy protest movement Iraq boycotted the elections. More news coming up in this news bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back now. Sudan's Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok has warned of the civil war risks fueled by loyalists of the previous regime. Hamdok made the remarks days after men carrying clubs and sticks blocked roads in Khartoum following the removal of fuel subsidies. In a televised address, he sought to defend reforms meant to pull Sudan out of the economic crisis and stabilize a political transition. Hamdok said without reforms in the sprawling security sector, Sudan will continue to face internal and external threats. He said the disagreements in the governmental quarters have worsened the security situation, which can be exploited by criminal groups. Earlier, security personnel agreed on major parts of a framework peace deal with the most powerful rebel leader from the country's south. Now, at least 14 people have been killed in a revenge attack in Chadian herders in the far north of the Central African Republic. Authorities say the dispute began when a herder led his livestock into a field near Tiri. They say the cattle destroyed the crops and the farmers killed the herder. Officials at the Chadian herders went on a rampage in reprisal. The herders killed farmers, including women and children, and torched 66 homes as well as granaries. Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un has admitted that North Korea's food situation is tense. Typhoons and the coronavirus pandemic have added to the woes of a country facing international sanctions. State media says Kim told a plenary of the ruling party that the economy improved this year. But he added there were deviations due to several challenges. He said there is food insecurity as the agricultural sector failed to fulfill its grain production plan due to the typhoon last year. Kim called for steps to minimize the impact of such natural disasters and said ensuring a good harvest was a top priority. The meeting also discussed the prolonged nature of the coronavirus pandemic. Switzerland says the US has vowed to provide increased support to a mechanism that allows humanitarian aid to reach Iran. In a press briefing, Swiss Foreign Minister Ignacio Cassis said the mechanism works, but it is not used enough. Cassis voiced satisfaction with the US openness to support the instrument to help the Iranian people. His comments came after he and Swiss President Guy Parmelin met briefly with President Joe Biden shortly after he landed in Geneva. The Swiss humanitarian trade arrangement was created with cooperation with the US and Iran, and it took effect last year. It allows Swiss companies to deliver humanitarian aid to Iran without breaching Washington's sanctions against Tehran. Moving on now, the US has unveiled a plan to address the threat of violence posed by white supremacists and militias. The move comes 5 months after members of those groups joined in a deadly attack on the US Capitol. Biden administration conducted a sweeping assessment of the domestic terrorism that labeled these groups as a top national security threat. The White House released a 30-page plan for increased information sharing between authorities and social media companies. The plan aims to identify and prosecute threats and new deterrents to prevent Americans from joining dangerous groups. In a speech, Attorney General Merrick Garland said Washington will focus on what he called long-term solutions.
I'm pleased to announce that the administration is today releasing the first national strategy for countering domestic terrorism. Each of your components will play an important role in ensuring its success. The national strategy is designed to coordinate and provide a principled path for the federal government's efforts to counter the heightened domestic terrorism threat using all available tools.
Now, in Pakistan's southern Sindh province, the Indian blue peafowls have made a comeback after decades of deforestation and drought.
Each of your components.
For decades, the Indian blue peafowl, which is only found in the wild in Pakistan's Tharparkar region and in small area of Azad Kashmir, had been under severe threat because of the long dry spells. Amid the habitat challenges, the peafowl population hit a low in 2011, when a viral disease swept through the area, leaving only about 200,000 survivors. Now, however, wildlife officials of Sindh province claim that a sanctuary in Tharparkar is seeing a comeback.
We bring tankers full of water from Mithi and we distribute the water here for these birds. We are trying to return this place to the peafowl's natural habitat so that we can keep them there. This is a very rare species. It is not found anywhere in the world except here in Sindh. It is especially rare in Tharparkar.
The conservation staff has been providing more nutritious grains and digging more ponds to retain water. Officials say the last two monsoons have been wetter than usual, and that has also given some respite.
In one tehsil, we have located more than 150,000 peafowls. We are carrying the census forward. We have 7 sectors in all and 23,000 square kilometers of area that we are surveying. God willing, the numbers will turn out to be in the millions.
Sanctuary residents have also been doing their part to support the peafowl population by feeding them. Officials speculate the peacocks have increased 5-fold from the crisis period.
Now, European stocks are trading slightly higher as markets await the outcome of the US Federal Reserve's policy meeting. London's FTSE led gains while the Stock 600 and CAC 40 in Paris advanced marginally. Frankfurt's DAX shed close to 0.25%. Italy's FTSE MIB traded mostly flat. Earlier, Asian stocks traded mixed, with Seoul's and Australia's shares gaining, while mainland Chinese, Hong Kong's and that of Japan losing. Southwest Airlines has cancelled around 500 flights after it had to halt operations over a computer issue. The This is the second time in the last 24 hours that the US-based airline was forced to suspend flights. The airline said it suffered intermittent performance issues with network connectivity, which caused the halt. However, the operations are returning to normal. The airline added it is in the process of investigating the root causes behind the technology issue. Earlier, the Federal Aviation Authority issued a temporary nationwide ground stop at the request of the airlines as it resolved the issue. With that, we come to the end of this news bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.